This is Radio 97. It's time for our resident lawyer, Despina Priala, from boutique law firm Priala Legal in Runaway Bay, to join us as she does every Thursday to offer her legal expertise by providing some general advice on the latest hot topics. She has experience that covers more than 25 years in areas such as property and commercial law. She also prepares wills as part of estate planning and litigation, and she's always here to answer your questions, my questions, our questions. Morning to you, Despina.
Good morning, Wayne. Good morning, Brooke.
Good morning, Despina. Thank you for coming back on the show. This week, or today, is going to be a big double segment because recently so many people would have seen or even heard, obviously, on our local news as well, a big spike in dog attacks, especially I find on the Gold Coast. But today, it's not an opinion piece, but we're just going to go through the facts, the law, and what to be aware of in terms of being a dog owner and, heaven forbid, being a dog maybe attack victim as well. So, Despina, where would you like to start with this one?
Well, thank you for that intro. Yes, so there have been a lot of dog attacks over the last few months, and people listening out there would be well aware of those on the Gold Coast. And of course, it happens elsewhere, not just on the Gold Coast. But I did want to say up front, and it's obviously a very sensitive and delicate issue, that we're not here to comment on any of the particular events that have occurred that have hit the headlines recently or on the last few months. That's not what we're here to do today because we can't comment because simply we weren't there and we can't pass on any comments or judgment. What we can do, though, is we can talk about the law, and we love the law sometimes. So we want to talk about, as a dog owner and cat owner, a pet owner, we want to talk about your responsibilities towards your pet. What do you have to do to be a responsible pet owner? It's very important to understand that. We want to talk about the actions that council, so local government, can take in certain situations. How far do those powers extend? How do they apply in certain situations? We want to talk about the offences and the penalties that can go with some of these offences. I know there's been some talk recently in headlines that some people think the offences, or I should say the penalties, aren't enough. But I'm happy to talk through what the current penalties are, and people can comment if they wish later on about that. And also defences that are available to pet owners in a dog attack situation, and some other things that people need to know about, particularly with council's rights, such as coming onto your property, gaining entry, getting warrants issued, seizing dogs, destruction of dogs, declaration of dogs, etc. So that's what we're going to do today.
All right, Despina. Now, when we first get a dog, often it's a little puppy and it's a little ball of cuteness and all that sort of thing, and it's great and the family loves it, etc. It's a terrific addition, or can be a terrific addition, to a family or to a household. But there are an enormous amount of responsibilities that come with dog ownership as well.
There are. And in Queensland, we've got a piece of legislation since 2008 called the Animal Cats and Dogs Management Act. And that is and there's some regulations that go with it as well. And that is the piece of legislation that currently governs the responsibility and management of your pet. So in there are a lot of clauses and provisions about being a responsible pet owner. So first of all, we want to talk about what does that mean? And some of them might be obvious when I mention them, but it's a good reminder anyway. So, of course, if you're taking your dog out in public, and this is what we want to concentrate on, because these dog attacks that we've seen, which has been an issue, have occurred mostly or all, to my knowledge, in public places, so out in the community. And the Act talks about making sure that the community is healthy and safe. Okay, so and that's where the premise starts from, in terms of the responsibility of pet owners. So, of course, the dog has got to be kept on a leash in public at all times. There are no exceptions other than designated dog parks, where it actually says you can take your dog off your leash, right? So you've got to be able to keep them on a leash at all times, except in those places. And, of course, you've got to be able to control your dog. So even if you went into an off-leash park, you've got to still be able to control your dog. because your dog could run around and cause issues with other dogs in that particular park, that enclosed area.
Yep.
So that's very important to understand. Of course, you've got to keep up with registration, as everybody knows. You've got to make sure your dog is not a nuisance to others in public. And at home, what do you need to do? You've got to make sure that you've got secure escape-proof fencing and enclosures at home. So in other words, don't let your dog have an escape route because obviously they'll get out in public with or without your knowledge and can cause a nuisance and a menace to other people. And there's another one we want to touch upon today in the segment with some examples about really be careful as a responsible dog owner to not just simply hand your dog over to someone else to walk or to manage or look after. It's really, I think, a bit of an issue sometimes because you're really handing over custody and control of your dog. And given all the offences we're going to talk about, the penalties, you really want to be careful who you're handing over custody and control of your dog to.
Yeah, 100%. I find it so interesting because obviously you think, oh, myself, we grew up with a giant German Shepherd. I remember a few times Mum and Dad would go, okay, honey, it's your turn, walk the dog. And we'd fight over who was about to walk the dog when I was probably 20 kilos and the dog was 50 or something ridiculous. You could imagine if a dog, say, snapped at him or something. How could a kid really take control in that situation? So it's very innocent. You think you're doing, it's okay.
Doing the right
it's my
thing.
family.
Yeah.
I trust them.
Yeah.
But something
Exactly. So when your responsibility under the Act is you've got to ensure that you take reasonable steps so that your dog doesn't cause harm or be a nuisance to the community. How do you do that if you palm it off to someone else who may not be a responsible person? And particularly you can't do that to, I don't think, any person that's a minor or a child. So when we talk about offences and penalties, for example, we talk about an owner taking reasonable steps to ensure the dog doesn't attack or does not act in a way that causes fear to a person or an animal. That's also something that you've got to do as a responsible pet owner. Now, let's talk about the penalties and then we'll go into some more detailed provisions about the powers that council have and what actions they can take in an incident. And that's when we'll talk about the entry into the home, warrants, destruction of dogs, declaration of dogs. So we talk about penalties, if we go back to that, where there's an attack that causes grievous bodily harm, it's 300 penalty units, and that currently equates to $41,100.
Ooh, yeah.
Yeah. So that's to a person or an animal. So that's grievous bodily harm. And look, in terms of examples of that, it's a serious attack.
Yep.
So that's nothing to be sneezed at. If the attack causes death to an animal or grievous bodily harm to an animal, then it's 100 penalty units and $13,700. So there's the difference. So, sorry, the previous one I talked about where an attack causes grievous bodily harm, that's to a person, not an animal.
Yep.
So that's why it's the highest penalty, 41,100. Then if you go back to, well, if the attack causes death to an animal or grievous bodily harm to an animal, not a person, then we're talking about a maximum penalty of $13,700. And then you've got an attack that causes bodily harm or a less serious attack to a person or animal. You've got 50 penalty units and $6,850.
Coming up next on Talking Law, we'll be discussing the wide powers that council have under the Animal Management Act. That's coming up next on Talking Law. You're listening to Radio 97.